Welcome to Draw This. Draw This is a series of videos where I'll randomly generate a word and then draw it in real time while describing my process so that you, the viewer, can follow along. So let's go ahead and get started. Alright, so I'm using the word generator on wordgenerator.net to generate a word, and that word is jellyfish. So I'm going to do kind of a cartoon, sort of anime style jellyfish. For this, I'm going to use Microsoft Expression Design 4, which is a free piece of software that you can use if you're using a PC. And it's a very good vector program. I like it a lot better than Adobe Illustrator in some ways. So what I'm going to do is I've created a layer here for sketch, and I'm just going to use the paintbrush with this particular calligraphic brush to draw in a sketch. So jellyfish is going to be kind of this shape for the body, and then it's going to have some tentacles kind of hang down. Just a rough, quick sketch. And we'll make it kind of cartoony. We'll give it some eyes. Make it kind of goofy looking. Something like that for our sketch. And then I'll just select the whole thing and reposition it on the canvas to center it up a little bit better. And then I'm going to lock the sketch layer and create a new layer on top of that, and that will be called ink. And on this ink layer, I'm going to use the same brush. I'm just going to make it wider. Let's try 16 and see how that looks. And I'm going to change the stroke color to black, and I'll just do a test here. I think I want something a little bit thicker. I'm going to try 20 for the stroke width. And the reason why I like this software a lot is because there is this B-spline tool, which is just a different version of the Bezier pen. It seems to work a lot better and makes more sense to me. It's easier to use. So what you do is you tap and you tap and you tap and you make points each time you tap. You double tap to end your path if you want to. Still needs to be thicker. I'm going to try 26. Okay. So I'm going to just start tapping as I go along this path. This is really one of those things where you have to just try it and feel how many points you need to make. It kind of depends on what you're drawing, but you can always go and adjust these points afterward, which is pretty handy. So I'll go with that for now, and then let's do the eyes. You have to hover over the end point of your stroke to make a closed shape. I'm going to do the lines for the face. Sometimes you have to be careful because you may not want to connect a line. Like right there, I had to do an undo because I wanted this line to go past this horizontal line rather than connect to it. Now we will do the iris or the pupils. And now we'll do the tentacles. This tool works really well for making nice, smooth, curved lines. If it gets a little hard to see, you can also just hide your sketch if you don't really feel like you need it to be there. I feel like I just want to kind of draw these without it there. I'm not going to worry about getting it perfect because, as you saw, it's not very hard to go in and clean up these lines. I don't know that jellyfish have any specific number of tentacles, so I'm just going to go with that there. And then I'm going to use this white arrow tool to just move some of these endpoints to make them connect a little bit better to the body. And I think I want to move the mouth. I'm not happy with where it's at, so I'm going to move it more centered. I think that's looking good. Now let's add some color to our jellyfish. So I'm going to create a new layer and move it below the ink. I'm going to lock the ink just so I don't accidentally click on it. And let's call this tentacles. This will be the color for the tentacles. And we will go ahead and fill that with, let's say a light blue. I'll have to switch to my fill color. Make sure there's no stroke color. Let's go with like an aquamarine color like this. I'm gonna use the same B-spline tool and just follow along. If you wanted to, you could also, depending on how you draw, you could have made this black line here have a fill, then you wouldn't have to do this twice, but I like to stack my lines on top of my color on separate layers, because I just find that it gives me a little more flexibility when I'm working. Again, just following, painting right on top of this black line so that I'm going behind it. And if I mess up and I paint over, paint under, it's not a big deal, because again, I can go in and I can make some adjustments to clean it up. I'll do this other one here really fast. And I'll just jump ahead with the other ones so that you don't have to wait for me to do all these. All right, so the tentacles are all filled in. Now the body should be much easier. We'll create a layer for that. Call it body. Let's use a different color of blue. And we'll go ahead and fill this body or this head in with a color. Now, here's a spot where I was painting along and then it decided that it wanted to connect to this tentacle here, which is obnoxious because now I have to start over. So what I recommend doing is every time you add something in, if you're worried about something like that happening in your layer, your new layers interfering with your already placed layers, you can just lock them. So I'm going to lock the tentacles, and I'm going to try that again. That's one of the negative things about this particular program, is that there are a couple things, little quirks like that, that bother me. But as you can see, there's a workaround. You just lock the layer and it's not an issue anymore. All right, we have the body filled in. Let's create another layer, lock the body layer so that that doesn't interfere with us. Let's call this eyes. We'll use white. So you can see I'm just making layers for each color that kind of has its own grouping of parts. Like the tentacles are all kind of grouped together, they're all one thing, and then the eyes overlap the head, so they're on a layer. And the iris pupil area, that will also be on a layer. So we'll lock the eyes, we'll create a new layer for the iris. And let's pick maybe a kind of light magenta color like this. Go ahead and fill it in. All right, so there is our basic layout for our jellyfish. And I'm just going to unlock all these layers. I'm going to delete the sketch because we don't need that anymore. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to import this into Painter. So to do that, I'm going to go to File, Export. And I'll just put it somewhere where I can find it easily. I'm going to name it Jelly. And I want to export it as a PSD so that I have all the layers. Make sure that Save Layers is checked. I think this size will work here. I'm going to do Export All. And you'll see down here it's exporting everything. Sometimes you have to watch out because if you have one particular object selected, it might only export that layer. So now we can open this PSD in Corel Painter X3. And here it is inside of Painter. and all of these colors are on their own layers and our ink is on its own layer. So that's why I separated everything, is because I didn't want these all to come in as one single layer of color, because then I wouldn't have them separated. And the advantage here is that I can go to the body, I can turn on preserve transparency, and then I can use that feature to stencil off the outer area. So for example, if I paint on the jellyfish now, you can see I only paint within this shape here while this feature is on. So this makes it a lot easier to shade. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold Alt on my keyboard and sample this base color here. I think it's a fine color. And I'm going to make it darker and shift the hue a little bit more towards indigo. And this is what I'm going to use to make my shadow. As I mentioned, I'm going for kind of a sort of anime style, I guess. I'm going to sample the blue and bring it back, because I went a little too far there. Go with something like that. Sample the dark one again. Give him some rings around his eyes. So for this style, I'm doing kind of a very simple level of shading here. I'm not going to go too crazy with the shading, just going to be a couple levels. Go to the tentacles, sample that color, make that darker. We'll have the shadow from his body or her body. I'm not sure if jellyfish even have a gender. Just adding some shadows. This helps give it a sense of three-dimensionality. And if you do anything you don't like, you can always sample the original color and bring it back. I'm going to add a little bit more in like this. Let's go to the eyes, and we'll just use a kind of light gray blue. See if that shows up. Yep, that looks good. Add some kind of shadow areas for the eyes so they look more sunken in. We'll go to the iris layer and let's sample that color, make it lighter. And we'll even add a spot of white on there. And I think we'll go back to the body layer. Maybe we'll add one more layer of highlight to that. To make it look kind of reflective, I guess. I think that's probably enough. Now let's blend a little bit. It's kind of optional if you want to blend. You don't have to. You could leave it this hard shading, but I think I'll blend it a little bit to make it look more interesting. I'm going to use the coarse oily blender. I'm going to use these paper settings here with the Italian watercolor. And then I'm just going to blend right along that edge to kind of soften it, and this makes it look a little more painterly. You get that nice paper texture. We'll go to the tentacles and blend those. Scrubbing pretty hard here on these so that I really blend them up. When you're doing this at home, you don't have to be so rushed. I know it looks like I draw really fast, but that's just because I don't want this video to be really long. So I kind of rush through it, but at home you can really take your time here and get it done. I'm going to go back to the body layer because I see that in my rushing I forgot to do some blending around the eyes and the mouth. And of course we'll do the iris. Blend the bottom edge of that a little bit. And I'm thinking maybe we'll put some pupils in too using the scratchboard tool. Scratchboard tool will really help to match the inking that we did in the other program. Some little dots there. And maybe we'll add another layer on top for hatching. Let's do some hatching just over this to make it look a little more interesting. I'm going to turn off preserve transparency so that it'll let me paint. And this just gives it a little bit more contour and shading. Just doing kind of quick tapered strokes. And we'll do some on the tentacles as well. Kind of going in the direction of the tentacle rather than against it. You know, I could hatch this way as well if I wanted to do that particular style, but I like to follow the contours of what I'm hatching usually. Let's put a little bit on the bottom edge. It just helps it look more interesting, I think, to have these little details. And I'll put a couple little dots to give it some texture. Again, it'll just help it look more interesting. And then I think we'll put in just a little simple background. So we'll go to the canvas layer, we'll pick a dark blue. We'll make it more blue-green like that for the ocean color. And we'll fill that in with the blue. Let's add some shading to it. Let's use the digital airbrush. Let's make the color darker and more indigo. Use a big brush. Bottom of the ocean's darker, of course. So we'll just have a gradient that fades up. Sample our base color here and we'll make it a bit lighter. And we'll have some light that kind of comes here from the top. I'll make my brush a little bit smaller, make the color a bit brighter. So just look like rays of light coming from above the water. And then let's experiment with making this jellyfish look transparent. So let's go to the tentacles layer. Let's reduce the opacity of that layer. Let's do the same thing with the body. And then we really won't be able to see the transparency unless we put something behind it. So let's add a new layer, move it below all the other layers. Let's call it ripples. And let's use the digital airbrush. And we'll set this to screen. And then what I'm doing is I'm doing kind of wobbly, quick wobbly lines diagonally. Make my brush smaller. And let's add another layer. Let's call this multiply composite method. This will be ripples dark. And we'll select a dark blue for that. Let's go in the opposite direction this time. Make the brush smaller again. And then let us flatten all of these background layers. So what we'll do is we'll go to the ripples layer. We'll go to layers, drop. Oops, we don't want to do drop all. We want to do layers, drop. Go to the ripples dark layer, go to layers, drop. That basically just makes those three layers a single layer. And then now we want to blend the background a little bit. So we will go to effects, focus, and motion blur. Zoom to where we can see the background a little bit. And let's just increase these radius settings here and the thinness. It's really hard to see what you're doing in this preview, but as long as it's blurring it a little bit, that's all we really need to do. So we'll go to OK. And there we go. We have a nice rippled ocean background. You could feel free to blur this more if you want by going to effects, motion blur, and just keep applying it. It'll get blurrier and blurrier each time. And you can kind of see a little bit of transparency. If you wanted to put stuff in the background, you could draw in some bubbles and fish and other things behind the layers for the jellyfish. And in fact, we can just group these layers together and call it jelly. And you'll see that if we take this and we move it around, he is indeed kind of transparent. His eyes are still opaque, and that makes it kind of more cartoony and cool, I think. But then if you wanted to put some stuff behind it, like a fish or something, you could do that too. Maybe we'll do that. We'll put a little yellow fish back here so that you can really clearly see that this jellyfish is transparent. Now I already have a draw this episode on drawing fish, so I'm going to just make this look like a little goldfish cracker. It's going to be a pretty easy fish. I'll give it a little black set of eyes and maybe a little mouth. And let's just add some shading to it so that it doesn't look out of place. I'm just going to use a little orange color and just shade right along the bottom. And there you go. We have a finished jellyfish. If you enjoyed this episode of Draw This, take a second to like it and share it, and click the subscribe button so that you can see my latest videos as they're released. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for another episode of Draw This every Tuesday.